Sales Proformance Show.
Welcome back to the Sales Proformance podcast show with my co-host, Taylor Rash. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. Okay. Taylor and I have been talking, and just to give you some background, Taylor was a guest on the show. He is instrumental in the back end of this program on the marketing side, production side. He's a huge help in really navigating the success of the show. So we were talking a little bit more about it, and today we're going to switch it up. He's actually going to interview me. He's going to be the host. He's going to interview me because we have a lot of listeners who have come in most recently who really don't have a background about myself. And we thought it would be a great opportunity on this platform to share a little bit more about the guy who leads the podcasts and the host who I usually interview. But I'm going to switch seats today. I'm going to flip sides and give you all a little bit more insight about myself. And I'm really excited about this show. So Taylor, thank you for really spawning the idea. And secondly, thanks for hosting the show. Really appreciate it.
No, thanks for the opportunity to do it. I mean, Dave, we talk weekly, and you know me that I love stories. And as we started to go through this, I mean, I've known you, we've known each other coming up on 5 years. And there's been a lot of transition for sure in my life, but in yours as well, some big transitions. Yeah. And a lot of people that, you know, haven't known you for that long, don't really know the story behind Dave and Sales Proformance, probably would want to know that. So yeah, I think this is a cool opportunity. You don't see a lot of podcasts doing this. So I'm really excited for it. And I think it shows a little boldness on your part. So I'm excited.
Thank you. Really excited about it. And yes, listen, I will say this. We've known each other for a little over 5 years, and immediately we clicked right away. But what's really interesting is in the last 5 years, I know you yourself, we've been going through probably more transition professionally and growth than we have. And I mean, I've gone through a lot of growth, but these last few years is really a lot of navigation, and it's been great working with you and really going through this together, and excited to do this. So let's rock and roll.
Let's get into it.
Yeah.
So Dave, we'll talk. I mean, we don't necessarily have to go all the way back to the beginning, but we can talk about where I met you. And, you know, when I met you, I was the marketing director at a large home services company, and you owned a publication called Inside Coop.
Yes.
So we'll get into that more recent kind of transition here in a few minutes, but let's talk about what was before Inside Coop. Like, what led you to that ownership experience?
Yeah, I was lucky enough at an early age actually to have an opportunity in the franchise space. It was in the marketing and advertising space, and I literally was working in the health and fitness space, had a client, he introduced me to his brother. Long and the short of it is those two guys were instrumental mentors for me in my path. So it was a marketing program that targeted new movers. I was in Phoenix, Arizona in 99. There's a lot of new movers and new movement going on. And essentially that's where I learned how to sell and become a sales professional. Listen, first and foremost, I want to tell you, I do not have it all figured out. Okay. There's been a lot of things that I've done, in my past where I've made some mistakes. I wouldn't say a lot. There's things that I've made mistakes, and there are other things that I've done where I've just trusted the process and trusted my gut and kind of built over time. So, in my first career, I owned a franchise business. I was given an opportunity and I took it, and I developed that company pretty strongly throughout the Phoenix market. I was a top franchisee in the company. I had a great mentor, as I said, and I worked really hand in hand with the CEO and the owner to try different things and try new things and push the envelope. And that's where I learned at that time how to think outside the box and take some chances and take some risks, and also, put in the work ethic and learn as a student. I've always been a student, and I will continue to do that. But it was a great time for me from 99 essentially to about 2010 to really grow, not only as a sales professional, but even a small business owner at that point.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because there's a part of that story that you kind of touched on, but I want to dive into a little bit more. As a
Yeah.
previous franchise owner myself, a lot of times you think that, like, yeah, you pay your royalties, but then you get, the one post a month for whatever that may be. So you get a little bit of support, but you took it a little bit further, because a lot of franchise owners, they might think that they're alone in their bubble and all they can do is what they can do. But you actually went and reached out to the CEO and said, I want to spend time with you. So
Yes.
talk a little bit about that, about how you went above and beyond than just the franchise model.
Yeah, I think I always had a vision of growing this bigger and better each and every day. Listen, as people and professionals, we get weaker each day or we get stronger each day. And my goal was to get stronger each and every day. So I would always align myself with people who were doing things right, or we're pushing the envelope, or we're doing things to expand the business. And I align myself with two people. One, the CEO and the owner. And then two, I aligned myself with the guy who was the top franchise in the business. I went out and spent a week with him. I shadowed him. We did everything together. And then we obviously stayed in touch more often. But that was my goal. I said, listen, if I'm going to be the best, I've got to align myself with the best. So when I started doing that, I realized that one, they were great springboards for me to expand my vision. And then two, great people to bounce things off of and really try to get feedback if I'm on the right path or should I try this. So yeah, essentially I wasn't just running a franchise business, because typically in the franchise business, they give you a framework, a proven model, they hand it to you and they say, okay, run the plays. And if you run the plays correctly, you're going to be successful, right?
Yeah.
Well, in this franchise model, they were still growing. So it was a perfect opportunity for me to not only be in a space where I really wasn't just confined in that box, but also I'm working hand in hand with the guy who's leading the charge, and we're testing things and doing certain things that other franchisees aren't doing. But he knew in me that I had the willingness to, again, take those chances and do things that were outside the box. So I learned so much through those 10 years, because again, it goes back to what I said earlier. There were some things I tried that, went well. There were things that I tried that didn't go really well. And then there were other things I tried that were super successful in expanding the business. And I think that's how you really have to just evaluate it. You're going to make those mistakes, but you have to evaluate it and then pivot and adjust. And I had a great mentor in that time to do that with me.
No, that's awesome. It's such a unique perspective too, because again, you don't want to be stuck in the box. A lot of franchisees are stuck in boxes, but I don't want to make this a sales pitch for franchises. But yeah, I mean, they definitely have their place. Love them, business in a box, so to speak.
Yeah. And listen, it was great for me at 24 years old. I needed that, or going into business for the first time. If I would have went with a brick and mortar on my own, tried to create a marketing logo, a plan, like I recommend, for someone going into the business for the first time, franchise model is so good, because it gives you that platform and that framework to work into. And then after a certain amount of time, you're going to graduate if you're going to elevate. And sometimes people just stay in it, and that's just fine too. But yeah, I think it was a great path for me.
Yeah. And I think what the key point that I would put there is do your due diligence, because there's some franchise models that's all they want to do is sell you the license and you go do it, and the support stinks. Yes. But like you and your mentor, I think if you research and talk to people, and if they have a good sales training program, a good business program, like as long as they're going to support your success and be behind you. And there's some, I'm sure you've seen them, there's some franchises that just don't have that model. So be diligent, do your research.
Yeah, 100% on that.
All right. So you were in the franchise world doing marketing, advertising to new movers.
Yeah.
What was next?
So because it was so segmented to new movers, I think it was around 10. I started an additional marketing company, because we weren't doing any of this stuff at that time with the franchise model I was in, but postcard mailings, offering websites were starting to get more popular. We had these customers and we had these relationships, and sometimes we wanted to, again, make sure that they weren't going somewhere else for that. And again, I worked hand in hand with the CEO. We talked about doing this, and eventually it came part of their model, but postcard programs and things like that. So I developed that company, and then I ended up selling it. I ended up selling the franchise company. I was actually exiting out, and I started the company Inside Coop, which you mentioned earlier. It was a marketing and advertising company. And the thing was, I was like, listen, I'm involved in a franchise company. I think I can develop a franchise company. Little did I know. But what it comes down to is I had an end vision. And this is what I tell people too, just on a side note. It was funny. I was meeting with somebody last week about their company. When you start a company, think about the end game. I know this sounds really weird, but think about the end game first. Like, where do you want this thing to be in 5 to 10 years? Okay. Because it does give you a goal to work towards and a roadmap. So day one, you're developing your exit strategy, believe it or not. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I was taught that actually by my first mentor. He's like, you're developing your exit strategy now. But I developed a company called the Inside Coop magazine, and we started it in Phoenix. I went out 20,000 publications, developed my first mailing zone, and within 9 years we had 2.5 million, and we were in 10 different markets across the country. Wow. So there's a lot of dots to connect to that point, and I got to tell you, those were the years where I learned. I thought I knew stuff going into that company, but I just learned a whole new level of skill set and the guts of running an organization, because I didn't have that franchise framework, right? I didn't have a company on the back end doing just the production and support and all that stuff. I was creating an organization that was doing that from top to bottom. And it was a successful company. We went, like I said, from 20,000 to 2.5 million at that point, when we were up to about 15 franchises at our height. And we did that in a short time. So it was a really fun ride. But I got to tell you, the reason why it was so successful is because of the people who worked in the building with me and the franchises that were part of that program. And that's, being a leader is getting people to buy into your strategy and what you believe in. And that was the first step. But they were all the leaders because they were the ones that actually made it happen. And I really, truly believe that is lost some days with CEOs and people who are leading the charge, so to speak. And I think looking back on that, when you're in it, you're kind of running and you're gunning. Yeah. But when you look back on it and you look back at the journey, those are the kind of things that really made this whole thing happen.
For sure. And I think one thing I just want to, and we've talked about this before, but you talk about having your exit strategy from day one and setting those goals. And it's many people refer to it as like those big audacious goals and how you have to have those. And you think of like Gary Vee, who his big audacious goal, he wants to buy the New York Jets. He's very open. Am I ever going to do that? Probably not, but I'm going to work every day to try and get there. Yeah. So it's you got to have those goals in mind.
Yeah. And the thing I want to add to that before you go into it is, I think in the beginning of my career, I didn't set my goals high enough. I really didn't. I think big, because if you think big, the bigger you think, the closer you will get to that. Believe me. Set your standards high and really, because after I sold my first company, which was the franchise I was in, I went, wow, this is really happening. I know what I want this next company to look like, and believe it or not, it was very close to where it landed.
That's awesome. So with Inside Coop, we were a client. I can personally attest to the success of it. It worked for us. Otherwise we wouldn't have done it. But what happened after Inside Coop?
So a company came in and purchased the Inside Coop, one of the largest direct mail companies in the country, money mailer. Okay. They long and the short of it, we were coming through COVID. We plowed through COVID. We really stayed, we grinded it out. So we grinded it out. We kept mailing through COVID. And that was the real key of us coming out of it. By November of 20, we were by actually not even November, it was by September and October of 20, we were having record months with less franchises, because again, we kind of trimmed the fat a little bit. We were focusing on working with the people who were doing the work, and it really elevated the company. So long and the short is a company worked out a deal with a company to just do some money mailer, do some cross-selling into our markets. And then that relationship expanded. And next thing you know, we were having conversations about them acquiring us. So I went through an acquisition process that was pretty intense, and we went through it and we ended up putting the deal together. So part of that deal was for me to stay on board with them and help them build their national sales team, which I love doing. I love sales coaching. I love sales development. I love business development. I love personal development, and I love numbers. So when you kind of combine all of that stuff, it really aligns well with sales and sales development. So through my first 10 years, I'm learning how to sell. But then through my last 10 years, 9 years at that point, I was learning about the ins and outs of how to run a successful business. Listen, I'm a sales guy at heart. That's absolutely the truth. But I was lucky enough to learn how to run these businesses, and it translated over well in working with organizations. So now I'm working as a senior vice president of sales, developing a sales team of, I think we had 10 or 11 people at that point. And then over an 18-month period, we were up as high as 35 sales team members across the country.
Wow.
Developing CRMs, doing sales coaching, sales framework. Now, there was some stuff laid down, don't get me wrong, but it was coming in and revamping that, metrics, reading metrics, sales performance, setting up goals. I mean, so much to do, but it was a fantastic ride because I love building, and that's what we were doing at that point because they were kind of in the rebuilding phase. They were coming off COVID. Yeah. The company had dropped a lot. They lost a number of franchisees, and they were building up at that time. So it was great success and great people over there. Worked with some fantastic people.
Yeah. So there's two things that you just spoke about that I want to talk about. Kind of different, very different actually. So I'll say the two so we don't forget, and then we'll hop back into them. So one is you've sold two companies. One, you sold a franchise. I'm assuming that was just to another owner operator that was going to come in. The other one was to a large corporation. That's not a sale, that's an acquisition. So I'm going to talk about the difference of those processes. And then the second, or first, however you want to attack it, when you started the Inside Coop magazine, you were starting from scratch. So when you talk about building that sales team, selling print marketing and advertising is a grind. So as you're building that sales team, what do you look for? Does your sales approach or training, does it differ based on that person's personality, or do you look for someone with the same kind of foundation? So what does that look like when you're starting Inside Coop? How do you build that sales organization?
Yeah. Well, let's break down both questions. So the first one is, yes, the acquisition from selling a franchise business to a single owner to being acquired and then selling to a group that has 5 or 6 different brands under them is a total different experience. Some of the mechanics are the same. Obviously, you have to show a P&L and you have to show information and financials and all that kind of stuff. But it moved pretty quickly in the first sale because, again, the organization was big, but it wasn't extremely large. And there was a lot of communication back and forth on the day-to-day and the understanding, and not a lot of employees. The business could be run by one person out of their home, different deal. The second deal with the acquisition, which actually was sold, 2 companies being sold at the same time, because that was kind of the umbrella and my model. It was 90 to 120 days due diligence. We had a lot of legal involved.
Yeah.
I mean, it came down to the deadline, like to the last hour, which I'm sure there's a ton of stories like that, where it's just, you're trying to get everything together. I mean, there's a file folder of the things that you have to put in every document, anything that is pertaining to the business that they would need to know, or they even request, they might not even need to know. You just got to put it in there. And there was so much information. Lucky enough for us, we were very organized in the way that we were running the organization. So a lot of the stuff was there, but it took some time to get it first, everything they needed. Then they needed to go through it. Then there were questions. And we had I would say probably anywhere from 5 to 10 meetings. Some were a half hour where I'm meeting with all their stakeholders. Others were just me and the CEO meeting. Others were our attorneys all getting together in the group. Right. So it was a process. And there's a lot of, I think the biggest thing when you're doing an acquisition like that is just understanding the information and understanding the path of when that acquisition happens, what's going to be next. And I think what I did in that acquisition that I probably, if I were to look back and say, you know what, I'd change one more thing, I think I would have asked more questions on their growth path. I asked broad stroke questions and got the answers I want to hear, but I think I would have probably dug a little bit more on that process, on how they were going to deliver it once the acquisition happened. Because once you sell the company, that's it. I mean, it's theirs. They're going to do what they want to do with it. And I mean, we've all heard the stories that have worked out really, really well, and the ones that have been horror stories as well. And I think I would have dug a little bit more on that. But up until that point, I think it was a great learning experience, and really went through that process.
Awesome. Yeah. So now the other question, I mean, and so with your company now, which we'll dive into, because I think a lot of what happens, people don't really understand. Like, there's a lot of back end stuff, and we'll dig into that. But going back to your last company, Inside Coop, what's your process for hiring a sales team, training a sales team, releasing your sales team? Like, how did that work? Because again, marketing, advertising, sales is a grind. Yeah. So how do you recruit? How do you find the right people? And then how did you build that organization from a sales standpoint? Yeah, well, listen, in any sales organization, the thing that cures all is what? Sales, right? Yeah. So if there's anything that I would recommend when someone's developing a sales organization, is understand your sales process, your sales framework. Okay. There are too many companies out there right now that like to give they give the product knowledge, and they give a once over on how you should develop the sale or to execute on the sales process. And they say, here's your thing, go grind it out, go do it. Yeah. That was not my philosophy. I learned very early, actually, my first company, and I wish it would kind of hit me in the face, is that when you hire sales professionals for your business, and there's some who do, but most are not going to work the way that you're going to work. And two, this is true, they're not me. Okay. So what I learned in that first company that translated over in developing a sales organization at the Inside Coop was that I had to create a sales framework that a stronger, or maybe someone who needed improvement, maybe an A, B, or C player type salesperson, could learn from. They'd learn the framework, and then they would be able to build it and make it their own, okay, as they went along. So if you can give your sales team a good solid framework that they can digest and execute on, it's not overcomplicated or undervalued, then you're going to be in a good spot. So I went out and grinded that out in the first year. I mean, I was really working on it. For as good as I was in that space, I knew that there were things that needed just to be put down on paper, in the process, and developing a strategy. Because the long term was to develop the company nationally. And I knew I had to have that framework down first and foremost. Obviously, good people on the operations side and administration side, that is key as well. But I knew that the sales framework needed to be done first. So that was the real key. It had to be digestible, executable, and lastly, proven that it works. And it did. All three of those boxes were checked. Yeah. I mean, I'm working with a client now where they want to grow. They're very successful, doing great, but we're going to help them grow a little bit. And one thing that we've been working on as we go through their CRM is like, well, we know. Well, no, I don't need to put it in there because I know. I'm like, no, you have to stop thinking about today. You need to have this so locked down where someone can never talk to you, never come into the office, never do anything, but they can look at the CRM and see everything that they need to set themselves up for success, specifically on the sales team. But you have to document and have these processes in. So if you never touch it, nobody can read your mind. Well, if you get sick or you're on vacation or whatever else, everything needs to be documented. If someone comes in and they get hired to be on the sales team, well, you can't just, like you said, they're not you. So they're going to do things the way that they're taught to do. So why not have it all documented? Like, it's so important just to have everything documented, processes, procedures. So it's interesting that that's really the first thing that you did when you started your company by doing it.
Yeah, just by doing it, right? And again, you have to keep in mind, they're not you too, right? So like you said, well, I can go in and I'll just go in and find it there, right? No, they're not you. They need to understand how to do that. So yeah, I think that's a huge point and a really important one in building a sales organization. Because again, it all starts with sales. And that has to be an executable plan for sure. For sure.
Absolutely. All right. So you went through the acquisition that had no speed bumps, I'm sure, no hiccups, no anything. Everything was perfect.
Yeah, right.
Down to the last minute.
You and I've had conversations about that, right?
We have. But you remain positive through the entire thing, which I'll give you.
You got to. Yeah. I mean, it's just, listen, here's what it comes down to. It's the challenging days that you learn the most from. And as much as they suck, and as much as you're going through the shit, because there were some shitty moments after that acquisition deal. Okay. There were some really good ones. Don't get me wrong. There were some really good ones. And then there were some real rocky ones too. Okay. Yeah. And it was funny. I was talking to a friend of mine at that time, and I was at a frustrated spot in my life at that point after I'd done it, because that's the other thing too. And I don't want to get too off track, but leading up to this point, I was like, oh man, sell the company and this and that. And it was done and it was great. Don't get me wrong. Things, they all fell into place, but I didn't think it was as great as I thought it was going to be. The feeling personally, like, I was like, wow, man, I thought the fireworks were going to be going off. And then you're like sitting in a room going, all right, I just sold the company. That's fantastic. And then the first thing I said to myself was, okay, now what? Like, right. What's happening? Where can I be how am I going to perform to the best? So yeah, going into it, the transition was, there were some great days. There were some challenging days, but I always went in with the attitude that I was going to do the best that I could. And I play to win too. So no matter what I'm doing, who I'm involved with, the idea is to play to win. But I did have a person when I was going through a tough time. He looked at me and he goes, Dave, you know what you do when you're going through hell? And I said, no, what? He said, you keep going, dude. And I said, right there. That lit me up. That lit me up. I said, all right, I'm going to keep going. And I did. And that's the truth. I mean, I kept plowing through, and there were days that were much better. But there was just a time where I felt like it was all coming at me.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's such a cool story. And I appreciate your transparency on that too, because a lot of people, it's all rainbows and butterflies, and to have the truth from someone is important and valued.
Yeah.
All right. So sold the company, you're sitting around wondering what's next.
Yeah.
Twiddling thumbs. Let's talk about what happened. Let's talk about Sales Proformance a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm still working as their senior VP, but I know that my heart's not in it as well as much as it should have been. But again, I gave 110%, but I knew that it was time to exit out. So there were a few things that aligned themselves. And it's again, when you put some stuff out to the universe, everybody, it's amazing how things will just the universe will conspire with you to make things happen. So I knew I wanted to consult. And I'll tell you why I wanted to do this. I worked inside of businesses inside out for so many years. And I was in the weeds, in the thick of things. And again, I learned so much. I had so much education, nothing you can find in a book. And when I took myself out of the business and I was looking outside in, man, it was a total different perspective. I could see things where I was like, oh, and dude, you need to do this. Okay. You need to do that. Like, when you called me and you said, "Hey man, I was let go," first thing I did was call you and said, "Dude, this is awesome." You're like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yes, this is awesome. Here's why." But when you're looking outside in and you're not so connected with everything, it makes it much easier. So I love the consulting because I've been doing that now for about two years. And I love the consulting work because you get to look outside in an organization. And there's things that are right under your nose when you're running them and you're in the thick of things that you can't see. But when you're outside in and you're not so, how I say it, in the thick of it, you just see things a little bit more. So I decided to go into the consulting world. And it's a mixed bag of things that I do right now, mostly on the business development side. And again, sales and business development. I love working with salespeople. I love working with sales teams. I love looking at sales frameworks. I love looking inside an organization. And I really base it on three things. Okay, here's the way I look at an organization. I have three, and I'm actually putting a book together on this. Okay, you have your DNA, okay, here. Then you have your NBA and your CBA, okay? Now, your DNA, obviously, of your business is the makeup of your organization, your organizational chart, how you make money on your products, the P&Ls, all that kind of stuff. The whole organization, the organization as a whole. Your NBA is your new business acquisition. How are you acquiring new business? And what do those silos look like? You know, your management team, your sales process, your framework, your execution plan, all that stuff. How are everything that's in that bucket to acquire new business? And then you have your CBA, which is your current business acquisition. How are you handling your current customers? Who's having a great experience? Who's not having a great experience? And why? Are we capitalizing on the people who are current customers with us and staying in touch with them? You know, all that kind of stuff. So when you have your NBA and your CBA and those get stronger, so does your DNA. And essentially, it sounds kind of simple, but there's so much to unpack in those three silos and those three areas. But realistically, the whole idea behind running a business is to make sure that your DNA is stronger. And the two things that really play a key role in making those stronger are your new business acquisition and your current business acquisition. And listen, operations can fall into your current business acquisition. Operation can fall in your DNA. So there's a lot of things that may cross over, but when you start putting into those three buckets, it makes it so much clearer. And then you realize what I learned with organizations by doing this is they understand where to put pressure versus just kind of punching water, so to speak, right? Yeah. They think they should be doing this, or they think they should be. No, when you go through this process, you know exactly where you need to put pressure to improve things, but also celebrate and put pressure on areas where things are going really, really well. Sometimes people miss that.
Yeah.
They want to focus on all these outside the box things that are not making them money, but they're forgetting to put pressure on the things that are making them the most money. Right. And that's part of my philosophy when it comes to looking at organizations. So within that, I work with a lot of teams. I work with CEOs. I also work with a lot of sales teams to improve those NBA and those CBA buckets as well.
And you also, and we've had conversations about this, but you'll also go into an organization that maybe they've been around forever and they have an okay sales team. Maybe both of those buckets are performing okay, but they're getting ready for that next stage of growth. And you'll kind of go in and, number one, analyze what they're doing, look at their current framework if they have one, or sometimes you'll create a brand new framework from start to finish. So what's kind of the process with that?
Well, it's funny because we're working with a company that's been around for 75 years, and they're launching. It's not even launching a new product line. They're trying to get into a different segment, a collegiate segment. But what you have to look at again is what's going really well, what works well, and what doesn't work well. And I like to apply the framework of going back to what I talked about earlier. To improve your sales as a whole, you have to kind of strip it down and look at the sales execution framework. is sometimes there's not even a framework. It's like, hey, I'm just going to send you some information. We're going to follow up. There's a lot of basic things sometimes that are being missed. But, I have 5 key components that I really employ when putting together a sales framework. And a lot of times, there'll be companies that have maybe 1 or 2 or 3 of these, but maybe not all 5. Or sometimes they do have figments of all 5 and they just need to improve upon them. So I always like to look at sales processes that have the right things wrong with them. Okay. Mm-hmm. And usually what it is if you've got a great product, but you're not really maximizing to the best capacity, I'd say that's the right things wrong with it. We got to look at your framework. I can identify really quick where to start poking and putting pressure to see if it's if it's going to work out. So yeah, I guess to sum it up, it goes back to just that. Find out make sure has the right things wrong with the process or the product, and you can fill the gaps.
Oh, that's great. I think too, just because of the world that I was in previous to where I'm at now, the NBA, CBA buckets, there has to be that balance, right? Because a lot of, especially startups, tech companies, all they care about is number one, getting acquired. So they put everything in the NBA bucket, and you look at their churn rate. And I'm not saying this is any specific company, but you look at a churn rate that's off the charts, because all they care about is new business acquisition. What's our MRR? What's our ARR? They don't give enough attention to the CBA. And then all of a sudden the CBA, the clients or customers that are in the CBA move on somewhere else where they'll get that treatment. So it's seeing where we need to poke and prod and kind of push a little bit without losing sight of the other area, because that's your foundation. I mean, the people that are already paying you, that's your bread and butter. I mean, keep them happy, or they're just going to leave. And now it's twice the work to get back to where you were.
Absolutely. And understanding that too, like there's a company that Sales Proformance we're working with right now. Since we've been working with them, we're up 31% year over year in sales. Okay. But we knew right away that new sales was something that we had to get going. Well, now the next phase of this is to look at the CBA. I mean, it's not something you just look at and then you implement everything all at once. Right. You've got to implement them in processes. Now we're looking at the CBA. We're going to look under every rock. We're going to look at all the data, and we're going to find out what the retention looks like. Because when you start pushing, and it sounds so simple, but when you start pushing the 2 arrows, new business and retention, it's amazing how, and it doesn't have to be huge. You could go 10% here and 5% here, and that turns into a 30 or 40% increase. It could be in some cases, but depending on the what you're focusing on. But realistically, yeah, it's pretty amazing when you simplify it that way and you can identify it, because then you figure out where to put pressure. I love that. I just love that aspect of being able to do that. And again, it goes back to what we're saying. Sometimes when you're in the business and you're working with it every day and you're in the weeds, you don't see this kind of stuff. And the other thing that really motivated me to move into the consulting space was that I looked back on the years of growing the businesses that I grew, and we always grew the most when I had somebody from the outside in working with me. And I worked with some great consultants. And those were the times where I think I learned the most, honestly.
Yeah. And I think that goes for, sales, operations, marketing. Some of my clients, I get in there and they think that everything is great, and it could be. It might be just kind of cruising along, but having that outside look, sir, ma'am, if you adjusted these things, if you did this, you'd see that improvement. And we do it, and they're like, oh, I never even thought of that. Yeah. And you get so kind of stuck into what that either one, you're not going to experiment and test new things, or two, you just think it's okay. And okay is fine for some people, but if you want to do great, it's really important to have those outside eyes.
Yeah. Push the envelope, so to speak. But yeah, absolutely.
All right. So this thing that we're doing, this podcast, how the hell did you come up with this idea? Why did you do it? Let's go into the podcast, because I see like your consulting company is kind of one entity, and then this, and it's kind of grown and adapted as you've started doing these episodes, but
Yeah.
let's talk about the beginning of the podcast.
Well, first off, I love doing it. I really do. I love getting on this show and interviewing guests. And it was interesting. So let's back up. The whole idea, just based on my experience and what I've learned, I felt like doing a podcast was going to be good therapy even for me. You know, like just getting more into business and getting a better understanding of other businesses out there, because I had been in a similar space for a number of years. So it was good. I wouldn't say therapy, but it was good experience for me to start learning more about other organizations realistically. So, and the second thing was I was listening to podcasts, and there's some really, really good ones out there that I've kind of hung on to. And I also saw that there were some ones out there that honestly were kind of shitty. Yeah. And I felt like there was an opportunity there to put something out there that people could gravitate to. That's it. Okay. Yeah. And I know I'm early into this, and again, I had no clue of what I was doing, and I had a start and stop. Okay. I had a start and stop in the process of, I was working with, somebody who's ultimately, I love him to death, is my brother-in-law. And we were doing some start and stops where I bought a camera and like, I'm doing this high tech stuff. And, he was going to do the production on it, and he's super talented. Like, he's done movies and worked on video games. Like, he's super talented, and the lighting wasn't right. And I felt like it can't be that hard. Like, I got to tone it down a little bit here. So I got to start and stop. And then I ended up connecting with Ryan here at Titan and put together a great little platform for the podcast. But more importantly, it's all great to have the setup and everything, but it really comes down to the guests. The ability to be able to have connections with people from my past and previous experiences and have them tell their stories, such as you, coming on. I mean, the timing was really interesting when you did come on, and check that podcast out, everybody. Listen to that. But because we're going to do another one this year, coming up after your transition. But more importantly, to have great guests on, to tell great stories, to learn from it, for me to learn, because I learned something on all those podcasts, every one of them, was really fulfilling for me. So I don't do it. Obviously, I'm not getting paid to do it. I'm doing it because I just love the interaction. I love the business world. I love the stories. And I think it's great for people. If I can just touch one person with the show, if we can touch one person with the show who's thought about or teetered with the idea of getting into business ownership or needs help with sales development, I mean, that's what makes the whole thing worth it to me. It really does.
Okay. Yeah. And I think one thing, Dave, that I really appreciate about your podcast is I watch every episode, obviously. But it's kind of evolved into something, but the diversity and the type of guests that you have. For example, you have CEOs and business leaders, you have recruiters, you have chefs, you have barbers, you have former professional baseball players.
Yeah.
But it all kind of centers around that story and how they got where they are. I really appreciate you not having just the same type of person or the same role of person or whatever. I mean, I know I'm not going to say who it is, but you have another guest coming up that's completely different that you wouldn't even think is going to be on a sales performance or business type podcast.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate the diversity that you offer in that. And I would encourage everybody to go back, watch the episodes. They're just incredible.
Yeah. One of the things, Taylor, that I want to add to that before you ask the question is, you're going to see when you watch some of those shows back or watch one to the next show, you'll always, and I catch this in the show, some are business owners, some are sales leaders, some, like you said, one guy's a barber, entrepreneur is a barber. You'll always catch in these shows these common alignments. And I really try to point it out when I catch it. I'll go, hey, on the previous show, someone was just saying that thing earlier. And when you start picking those out, you realize that for the people who are successful or maybe trying to elevate to a next level, there's some commonality between them And you'll catch these links, and I try to point them out within the show because, listen, it's not recreating the wheel. There's a commonality of success. There's traits. There's things that you do when you run a business that are common to be successful, and you'll catch those during the show.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. So you recently started doing something outside of the show too, where you don't have a guest, which I know you're really passionate about, but you call it the Sharpen Your Axe series. What kind of spawned that, and what's the goal with that series? Because it's a little different than just a podcast.
Yeah, I started doing a few speaking events and really honing down kind of a talk regarding the things in the strategies and the disciplines and the things that I've done through the years to be successful. And again, some of it may apply to you, some of it may not apply. So the more I was doing this, the more content I was picking up as I was going along. And then I started digging back and looking through the years on some of the things that really made a difference in the growth in my career, not only professionally, but also the things that I do personally on a daily basis to stay successful and stay on top of my game. So I thought, well, heck, man, I'm coming up with, I've got all this stuff that's sitting here. I love doing the speaking events. I don't do as many as I'd like to, and I'd like to do more of those, but why not use this platform as a way to take some short snips and in 15 or 20 minutes, maybe at the max, and just take a strategy and lay it out on the platform and put it out to the world and see if some of the stuff applies. Because listen, all the stuff that I share here personally or professionally or on like the Sharpen Your Axe show, either I was taught by a mentor, either I read it in a book or listened to on a podcast and I applied it on my own and I was successful at it or not. Or three, I'm working with somebody and they teach me something, right? I'm every training that I do with a team or every talk that I have, I always learn something from somebody in the audience or somebody who I'm working with or training. So I really wanted to use the Sharpen Your Axe series as a quick platform to give people bite-sized doses of techniques and strategies to apply in their daily life to improve, personally or professionally.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So what's next? I mean, I know this is one of your longer episodes, but I'm having a blast doing it. So what's next? Like obviously all in on Sales Performance, but yes. What's the next stage look like?
All in on Sales Performance. And I want to do, as I just mentioned, keep elevating the clients that we're working with, have opportunities to elevate clients who need help in moving their companies to the next level or improving their sales, keep honing down the process and improving that as well. And growing this show. I think that's another goal, is to keep growing this show as we go along and bringing on great guests and putting out the word and sharing stories for people. And again, if we can touch more than one every episode, if we can touch one more every episode, that's going to be really part of it. But I think that's really the goal, is to keep expanding on the Sales Performance, keep helping companies grow, and then keep building this podcast and really getting out to the masses and touching people. And again, the speaking events too, I'm going to love to get more into that as well, just to be able to help elevate 1 or 20 or 50 or 1,000 people. That's the goal. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think we can probably end it there, and I'll close with this. So you've been instrumental in my development personally and professionally. So thank you for that. I had a ton of fun doing this. This was a nice little switch up. So thanks for the opportunity. Hopefully people can take something from it, learn a little bit more about you. Anything for closing that you have to say?
Well, I'm just back at you, man. I mean, I think we learn from each other each and every day. I mean, we meet once a week or once every other week. And you and I are always coming up with new ideas. It's like we get together and it's like ideas come up. Hey, what about that idea? Great. But when you're on that mindset and that level, that's one of the things that happens. So if I could close with this, anyone listening to the show, keep surrounding yourself with great people. Okay. Taylor is a great friend. He's a great business partner with me and a great confidant in the business space, in being able to bounce ideas off of, and just keep surrounding yourself with great people who elevate you versus bring you down, and or maybe squash on your dreams or want to pull you down, because that's what happens is when people are not, they get a little bit jealous of what's happened to you and when you start getting success. So what I tell you is keep aligning yourself with great people, keep striving to be better each and every day. Again, you get better or worse every day. You never stay the same. So keep striving to get better. And I just wish everybody wealth, health, and success. That's what it comes down to. And I'll close it up with that.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave.
All right, man. Thank you.
The Sales Proformance Show.